I'll just be honest, I was not prepared for how heated people were gonna get over the Master Chief losing his virginity last episode. I guess people think the Master Cheeks are very controversial. Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of Halo the series, this time the season finale of season 1 titled Transcendence. So as I kind of indicated with that joke there, there's been a little bit of a tiny bit of heated discourse around this show, especially after last episode with the Master Chief losing his virginity. And so for this review, I'm going to review the season finale and just sort of like do it like I've been normally doing for this entire season. But then I want to take the end of this video to kind of talk about my thoughts about this season as a whole, as well as a lot of the fan reaction to this season, because I kind of have a different take on this show, and you probably got that vibe from my entire review of the season, but I also, to a large degree, understand the backlash against it because of what this show was sort of sold to people as and what we actually got, despite my ultimately, at the end of the day, kind of enjoying the show, but I do understand a lot of the pushback and vitriol and anger towards it. And so I want to talk about that towards the end of this video. But before we get to that, let's actually talk about this finale, and I'll just sort of take it as is without the sort of grander view of the discourse. The opening of this episode, picking up right where we left off, I thought was a fairly strong opening because we have Captain Keyes sort of opening up to the rest of the Spartan team and revealing the truth to all of them. And the other two Spartans, who I don't even remember the name because they've been basically mostly non-characters this entire season, just like the other Spartans that are around, getting to finally get in on the sort of story that we've been going on with John and Kai. And like I said, it's not as powerful as it could be because these other Spartans have been such non-entities throughout this season, but I thought it was effectively done to sort of get us where we needed to go, which was have the entire Spartan team working together to stop Halsey and McKee. And I thought it was an interesting choice to have Kai go after Halsey, mostly because we haven't had a lot of scenes with Halsey and Kai, so when Kai confronts Halsey on the ship and says, "Who am I? What's my name?" it doesn't have as much emotional resonance to it as it could have had if they had had sort of prior on-screen relationship. Obviously, Kai and Halsey have had an off-screen relationship, but because these actors haven't had a real chance to engage each other within the show, it kind of sadly didn't work as well as it ultimately could have for me. It's a powerfully done scene in and of itself, but the fact that there wasn't enough like character build up to it didn't make it work as well for me. But Kai finally killing the scientist dude with Halsey was a good beat for her character, but again, frustrated that that didn't carry on. Good moment in the moment, and finally getting rid of that dude because he was kind of weirding me out this entire season. And also seeing Kai like jump on the ship and all that stuff was badass. And it, again, good scene in and of itself. Sadly doesn't work in context before it or even after it, with Kai not really feeling a lot of the baggage of having murdered this man accidentally. But then we have Halsey getting captured, and we have a few scenes with Miranda and Halsey, and I actually really loved how Miranda played these moments. These scenes worked really well for me, with Miranda sort of having just lost all of her naivety that we've seen over this season, and her just kind of being dead inside emotionally when confronting her mother and sort of revealing that her mother is, I guess, being sentenced to death. The sentenced to death thing, I could see that being justified. I'm a little mixed on it. It seemed a little bit harsh in terms of, like, I feel like the UNSC would still want to use Halsey even though they don't trust her, but use her brain. I feel like there's some sort of ethically dubious section that would still want to use her, but I can get where it's coming from. I can buy it. But I think emotionally for McKee it worked really well, and Halsey, again, still trying to manipulate her in those moments. I thought worked well. And then the ultimate reveal that it was a Flash clone of Halsey, which we had set up previously in the season she could do, and that they don't live very long, and that she's willing to just ethically just like murder other clones of herself to get away, I thought was a perfectly fitting for Halsey, and I thought a good ending to Halsey's arc this season. I thought all of that was really good. But then this brings us to the storyline where we have the Spartans going off to face the Covenant, and I'm like, finally, we actually have the Spartans going off directly to antagonize the Covenant, because they should be our main antagonist, not this all internal political nonsense. Not that I've disliked some of that stuff. I like the political intrigue, but like finally focusing on the Covenant, again, finally, is very much needed for the show. And I'll talk a little bit more about my feelings on that in the season-long review towards the end of this video. But I did find it frustrating that like Cortana would not tell the Spartans that there was going to be this like turbulence that they were going to face. I was also confused by it just generally. Like, I guess there's a gravitational barrier between the Covenant and Earth's controlled forces, which that's not in Halo lore, and I was kind of confused by it. Like, was that established earlier? Maybe I missed it, but a bit confused by it. Maybe it's a Forerunner thing. But wasn't very clear on that. It just seemed like forced drama to like have some danger to get them to the planet. But I did like some of the humanizing moments that we got here, like the moment between John and Cortana opening up to each other, building a relationship and establishing trust. I thought that was effective. Kai joking with the other Spartans I thought was also effective. I thought it was a nice humanizing moment for the other Spartans and Kai as well. All that was really good. But then also we have these sequences with McKee sort of being disowned by the Covenant, being like, oh, she's a filthy human and trash. And I'm like, that wasn't really established earlier on the season. I could buy it, but it felt a little bit forced to like the show just being like, all right, we're done with McKee now. And ultimately McKee dies in the end of this sequence, which again, I'm sure will please a lot of people that are vitriolic towards her character and just disliked her character as a whole. I have not loved her character, to be frank. I found her a bit she's less of disposable in terms of the main narrative as Quan is, who hasn't even showed up in like half of the storyline for this season, so screw Quan, I guess. But I didn't dislike her as much as other people did, so it just kind of feels like a wasted thing with her just dying here, and it just felt like she was a plot function for the story, which is very weird and a way for the show to save having to spend money on the Covenant, which very clearly is what it was. So again, just you can see the like hand of the writers just sort of disposing with the character now that she's done here, and so I was just kind of disappointed in that fact. But then this leads us to the Spartans arriving on this planet to stop the Covenant from getting the Halo's location, and I feel very mixed on the action that we got here, because this was very much like very video gamey type of action. They like literally land in what looks like a map straight from multiplayer Halo and taking out a lot of the Covenant there, but it's all CGI, and the CGI, it has moments of greatness, like where Master Chief's fighting the brutes and stuff. I thought that was like effectively choreographed and decently done CGI, but then there are moments where all the brutes and elites are coming at them, and you just see all of them, and the CGI just looked very blah and very bad, in my opinion. And it's kind of sad, because when this show has been effective, I think most with its action has been the practical action. Even in, I think it was episode 5, where we got the big Halo Covenant battle, a lot of that was done also practically on set. But all of this whole, like, even the place that they were filming here felt very CGI made. It was all just sort of not really there, and you could feel it a lot of the time. So I ultimately feel they really did a disservice to their own strengths in terms of the action being presented in this episode. Not badly choreographed completely, not badly done as a whole, but ultimately you're gonna compare the all CGI environment to the cutscenes and like the very well rendered stuff from the game, and it's not going to hold up. It just doesn't compare to the game, not just because of the fact that like the game looks better necessarily, but because also within the world of the game, you're not cutting to like live action stuff within it, so you have a little bit more of an investment within the like wholly unified world of the game. Like you're not having to like be pushed out by like, oh, CGI environment with a live action person, like all of it's CGI within the world of the game, and so it kind of works a little bit more. And also, again, I do think the games just look generally better than the show does anyway, so it's ultimately not really the greatest thing in terms of the big action. It's not bad. Like the moment where Master Chief's fighting the brute was really cool, though my boy Master Chief getting beat by a single brute, frustrating, to be frank. But they always depower heroes for live action stuff, because you can't always be like murdering everybody in live action compared to video games. Otherwise we'd have like Nathan Drake in the Uncharted movie like just being a mass murderer than he actually is in that movie. But from here, I just talked about most of the big stuff where McKee gets killed, we get the reveal of the location of the Halo ring, and then we get the sort of big sacrifice at the end of the episode where John has to sacrifice his body to Cortana in order for her to be able to touch the artifact. I'm a little bit wonky on this. I know they established this earlier in the season, but I'm sort of like, why would it matter if Cortana's controlling the body or not? Because it's like John's DNA. I guess it is tied to his humanity, but it is kind of interesting that that's how that works. It's a bit nebulous. And I also was unclear about the fact that like, why couldn't Kai have helped? Like, I get that, like, when Cortana takes over, she's better able to take down all these people because she has sort of, like, AI accuracy and computer and can take everything down and control the ship. But, like, why couldn't she control the ship while John was also controlling his own body? And John's fairly capable enough. And sort of it depowers John and makes him look kind of like a chump compared to Cortana in terms of his ability, which kind of, like, lowers your protagonist in the end here. And then him just getting to pick up the artifact and bring it on. And I'm just sort of, like, watching, oh, but I guess the other Spartans can save themselves now? It was a little bit wonky in terms of getting to that point, but I get what they were trying to do is like, oh, John sacrifices himself for Cortana to be able to save the other Spartans, sort of leading into all the themes of the season. And so I think logistically it didn't work as well as it could have, but I didn't hate it. I didn't ultimately despise it or think it was awful. I just think they could have done a little bit more to make the choice very more drastic than it needed to be. But then this leads our crew to getting away, and we see that Halsey is still out there somewhere, and Master Chief has the artifact, and we maybe know where the location of the Halo ring again. And again, screw Quan, because Quan doesn't even show up here. So ultimately, my thoughts on the finale are probably one of the weaker episodes of the show. Not bad. I have some moments that I like about it, and it does sort of complete some of the themes, but I don't think they're drawing upon all of the things that the show has built up so far as effectively as they could have, and I don't necessarily think the visuals and action live up to some of the better stuff this season. So I do like the finale, but I'm not, cheering and singing its praises. So that's my thoughts on the finale, but I want to take this moment now to kind of talk about the season as a whole and the controversy surrounding it. Because if you've been following my reviews for this season so far, you probably will have seen that I've actually been generally up on the season. If you go back to like my initial first few reviews of the season, I will say it did take me a while to get over the hump of how much this show is different from the games. That it was like, okay, a lot of the stuff that they're doing in the narrative is just completely ignoring the canon and story and lore of the games and drawing from it here and there, but ultimately trying to do its own thing. And while that threw me initially for how different it was in a lot of aspects and their characterization of John and things like that, I am someone generally who can sort of take a story and take it without expectations and at face value. I try to do that with all the media that I watch and consume, that no matter what part of franchises that it's a part of or anything like that, I always try to take it on its own terms and what it's trying to give to me. And I think once I was able to get over that initial hump with Halo, I was able to just invest in what this show is on its own terms. And I found that it was a pretty decent science fiction show. I have issues with a lot of the choices that it made, like with Quan being such a superfluous and ancillary character. Also, the other Spartan, whose name I even forget, from the rubble, the one dude who we met back in episode 2, they ultimately feel very superfluous, and you can see a lot of the hands of the writers in some of the storytelling, like the Burn Gorman character just being there to be an antagonist for Quan to just be disposed of when we don't need him anymore. And then you can see the same thing with McKee as well within our main plot line of the show, to just save the show from having to spend a lot of money on the budget for the Covenant and having her be sort of the main antagonist for the Covenant and be the face of the Covenant for the rest of the season, and then just disposing of her very quickly when she no longer serves a plot function within the show, instead of delving into her character and making her function more. And so you can kind of see those very clear, heavy-handed writing choices that I was disappointed with in a lot of senses. However, once I dug into some of the other aspects of this, like the themes of free will and control, all the stuff with Halsey and the UNSC and the political intrigue with John, all of that stuff I thought was actually very interesting and very thoughtful, and in a lot of ways, to a degree, in a different way than the games do it. It still reflected a lot of the themes that the games themselves touch upon. Themes of free will and control are part of the narrative of the Halo games, with things like the Covenant being a very heavily religious order and how the prophets use this religion in order to control the Covenant. And then also stuff with Halsey and things in the games being touching upon this as well as the Forerunners sort of influencing events with the Covenant and the Flood and all that stuff. So these themes of free will are part of the story of the games, and the show was doing that, but in a way that explored more of the lore of the UNSC, which within the games themselves, a little bit less so in the books and side media, but within the games themselves is a lot less explored as in terms of thematics and ideas and sort of building out that lore of it. But it fits naturally, I think, within what the show or within what the games are trying to talk about. And so I liked it, at least resonated on that level. And so all those things, even as someone who was a fan of Halo, I've grown up with Halo, I've played all the games, read a fair decent amount of the books and comics and all that stuff, taking that away from me and just sort of taking it in terms of what the show is, I have genuinely enjoyed it. I don't think it's a fantastic A+ science fiction show, but it kind of feels to me like The Expanse light. I love The Expanse. I think that is one of my favorite science fiction shows of all time. And this show just felt like it was kind of like The Expanse, gave me a little taste of The Expanse, but not nearly as good as it. Like a B-grade tier Expanse show, and I enjoyed it. I had fun with this show. I liked it for what it was, and I'm excited to see what they bring in season 2. However, I understand, though, a lot of people's frustration with this season as a whole, being fans of the game. There is a very real argument to be made about how this show was just them taking the Halo IP and the iconography and imagery from it in order to try and just sell it to the audience to get easy, quick interest and notoriety from fans without actually doing the work to build upon it. And I understand a lot of the fans' backlash at that because it is very clearly not giving them what their expectations have been set to be. And so I very very much understand that. And so when I've watched a bunch of other reviews of people of the show, and I see them getting very upset because, like, look, this is not matching, this is not doing this. And they also have fair critiques of the show otherwise than it just not matching the number of the game. I don't want you to paint with a broad brush and say, like, oh, they're just stuck up on the game stuff. Is a fair criticism. It is a very cynical, corporate-minded idea that is being brought into this series. However, I do get a little bit frustrated a lot with the vitriol attacking at the writers and stuff like that. Now, again, you can talk about, like, writers writing a story that you think works or not. Again, I have my issues with this season myself. But I always dislike this, like, vitriol pointed at writers being like, they're hacks, they're awful. Because I think that the writers can tell a good story. Then what I think is fair to get angry at them for is the sort of cynical-minded stuff. But even that's a more corporate decision than the writers. But I'm not going to say don't let the writers off of that. They chose to not write what the game was and to use this IP to tell their own story when it probably should have been its own story. But the vitriol that I feel in this conversation, it always just knocks me out. Even if I can understand it, I just always hate that our conversations get always heated and vitriolic and angry and just seem to be attacking people and calling them hacks and worst, and everything has to be the best or the worst, or it has to fit in these buckets. Not to say that the criticisms aren't valid, but the hyperbolicization of it always gets to me. But I do understand the criticism and even some of the anger. The vitriol, I think, is what gets to me in terms of these conversations. So ultimately, in the day, I liked this show. I enjoyed it, but I get the frustration at what it was trying to give. And for me, personally, being able to divorce myself from my fandom of Halo, I liked it for what it gave to me. But if people can't do that, I think that is perfectly legitimate and understandable why you would be frustrated as a fan of Halo getting into this show. What I will say, though, is I am mildly excited for Season 2, because now that we've sort of dealt away with McKee, and we have Master Chief sort of in a more set-up space where, like, he has Cortana, they have the friendship, Halsey is sort of on the outs of the UNSC, where she kind of is in the games as well. And we have the sort of standard setup for Captain Keyes and Miranda, and the Covenant now look to be the more main antagonist threat for the show going forward, with Halsey sort of being a sub-antagonist. With that, it looks like this show is starting to go in more of a direction that will more directly echo the lore of the games. And that may please fans more. And hopefully that'll sort of make everyone happier at the end of the day. We'll see if they'll able to build back any goodwill from the larger Halo fandom that they seem to have lost after Season 1. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But for me, I am in on Season 2. Again, I will not say this is the best science fiction show ever. I'm not like a staunch defender of it. But I enjoyed it for what it was. And I understand if other people didn't for various different reasons. But that's my thoughts on this season of Halo, as well as the finale of Halo. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you think it was hacked? Do you think they were awful? Do you think it's terrible? Do you think I'm just chilling for CBS? All that stuff. Like, let me know in the comments. I'd honestly welcome to the conversation, because I do think it's an interesting one about expectations and sort of how we talk about media that is made with these big name properties. I'd love to hear all that down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, because I have more reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds and other things on this channel as well. I have a main channel, Jessie Gender, where I have some other big videos coming out too, so hopefully you can join me for that. And also, don't forget to have a podcast called Jumpgate, where I do reviews of every episode of Babylon 5 with my friend Vera Wild from the Council of Geeks channel. But beyond all of that, I just thank you for being here, and I hope that you, as always, my friends, live long and prosper.